Here on The Colour of Country Life, we're speaking with Jonathan Pietzsch. He's a candidate in the state election, but also involved in farming out in the upper southeast. How are you, Jonathan?
Good, thanks, Ricky. Great to be here.
How has the year gone on the land? Before we talk politics, how's things looking out you're in the Tintinara district, are you?
Yeah, we're at Tintinara, out towards the coast, towards Pietzsch. And look, it's been a pretty good season all round. It was a very slow start and probably been a pretty dry finish for the last 6 weeks, but we certainly can't complain about how it's been going, and the commodity prices at the moment have been treating us very well.
Yeah, what are you cropping out in that part of the world? Is cropping, I take it?
We do some cropping, but it's mainly beef cattle and Angus beef cattle, and we crop some cereals predominantly so we can go back into our loosened pastures, which is the main game.
Yeah, and certainly on the beef front, it's been a sensational year on the pricing front for beef cattle.
It certainly has. I don't think we've seen anything like this before, and quite thankful for it at the moment. It's giving us the opportunity to improve other things on the farm.
Now, I gather from your involvement on the land, it's given you an interest in agri-politics, and you've put your hand up for the state election here in South Australia.
I have been on the land now from my late teenage years. We're actually from Melbourne originally, from the city, and agriculture has been something I've wanted to be involved in from a very young age, and been able to pursue that through, and certainly in agri-politics, see it as quite an important issue, and being able to advocate for what we do and improving our communities.
Now, you're involved at the leadership level also, I gather, as well, with the National Party. You're the state president, is that right?
That's correct, yes. I'm the state president of the South Australian National Party.
Yeah, and that puts you on the federal board of the National Party as well, does it?
It does, yep. So on the federal management board of the National Party, and that enables us to advocate. While we don't have any MPs in the National Party in South Australia, that's given us an avenue to advocate for the things that we see as being important down here, and to be able to bring a different perspective to the table than some of our federal ministers would necessarily hear otherwise.
And how long have you been involved in the National Party in South Australia?
In South Australia now for about 10 years, probably pushing 11.
And so there was at the last state election, the National Party didn't run any lower house candidates, did it? But you ran in the upper house?
No, the last state election we didn't field any candidates at all.
Right, so we've gone from you had Karlene Maywald in the Parliament a couple of elections ago, I guess, and then you didn't run candidates last election, but you're having the party's having a go this election with a few candidates.
That's for sure. So we've got 3 candidates that are announced at the moment. Myself in Mackillop, Damien Bias in Chaffey, and Bruce Priest in Schubert. And we're looking to make some further announcements in the new year with an expanded team.
Right, and we have caught up with Damien Bias here in the studio running for Chaffey. He had, in his first interview, had a go at Barnaby Joyce, or at least certainly at the National Party interstate in terms of Murray-Darling Basin policy. I guess, is that an indication that you will take a strong pro-South Australian stance if you do get people elected at state or federal elections in future? Absolutely.
Look, we see the National Party as being primarily focused on rural advocacy, and I'd say some of our federal and interstate counterparts have a different perspective that is at odds with what South Australia needs. And we need to be strong in telling them that, and that they're not right, they're wrong on certain issues. And the water policy one is something that we've taken the fight to a number of times at our federal council meetings, where it can be quite a heated discussion at times as those different perspectives are put across.
Yeah, I imagine so, but if you get some MPs elected at state level and even federal level, I imagine maybe you'll get listened to a little bit more than you currently might be?
It certainly would help, yeah. So we've certainly put across our views and indeed our displeasure at times with some of the Murray-Darling issues, but it would certainly be a much better thing for South Australia if we had somebody at that table all the time.
Now, we speak regularly with Dr. Anne Webster, who's a Nationals MP in northwestern Victoria, a bit like a Bermuda Triangle, but it's the Bermuda line, the border between Victoria and South Australia. You've got a strong Nationals presence on one side of the border, presence in the border, but then on the other side, there's nothing. Why is that? Why has the Nationals struggled in South Australia?
Look, I think, Ricky, some of that's historical. That goes back to the LCL and the former member for Barker that actually jumped ship from the Country Party to the Liberal Party many, many moons ago. But I think the status quo here isn't working. We've seen that with some of the cross-border issues where regional people just have not been listened to or understood. And I think it's time that we did have that strong National Party stance here that is solely focused on representing regional SA. and ensuring that those voices are heard.
Now, you mentioned just there about those cross-border issues. That seems to be the flashpoint you say you're running in Mackillop. That'd be against Nick McBride. He was sort of playing with this talk of leaving the party and running as an independent, says he consulted his electors and decided he'd stay with the Liberal Party. Do you think that maybe he should have left the party, or you think this really shows there is an appetite for non-Liberal representation in Mackillop?
Yeah, look, I think Nick was certainly picking up on the fact that what was being done in those regions was not representative of the best interests of those in his electorate. And people I spoke to that had heard about that plan of his to go independent were certainly in favour of it, because they did see it as being something that might represent them more so. But I think he's made his decisions to stay in the Liberal Party, but I think it did actually highlight why there is an issue there, that we need focused advocacy to ensure that 300 kilometres away we are heard.
When we look at what's happening, and we broadcast in Flow in South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales, so we see plenty from the National Party interstate. It does appear to us that at a federal level we're seeing policies rolled out because there is a national coalition partner in the governing party. What would you say are some of those signature elements of National Party policy that we're seeing rolled out nationally that we could see, that sort of flavour in South Australia?
Look, I think the one that's most recent is the one that's been pushed by Dr. David Gillespie, who's a member for Lyne, National Party MP. He's formerly a gastroenterologist and quite an experienced medical trainer. And the policy that came out in the last week has been about cancelling the HECS debt for GPs based on their service in regional Australia. I think that's going to have a great flow-on in South Australia particularly as well, to incentivise our new doctors to go bush and then to stay bush, particularly as we're looking at 6-year windows for the cancel of those HECS debts in some instances.
Yeah, that's not just doctors, I think it's nurses as well. They're saying they'll wipe HECS debt, or help debt as it's now called, for them if they choose to start practising from next year onwards, even if they were already practising there, to encourage them to move to or stay in a regional area.
That's correct, yeah, nurse practitioners as well. And I know, talking to Dr. Dave, that there's certainly some more initiatives around keeping medical people in the bush that we're going to see in the lead up to the federal election. I think that's just indicative of something that probably wouldn't have happened if he hadn't have been pushing that strongly as a National Party MP to get that outcome.
Speaking of health, country health has been a long-running challenge. We pick it up regularly in our broadcast areas, been concerns about whether emergency departments in the smaller hospitals in the country are open or as much as they should be. What is your party's policy going into a March state election on country health?
Look, it's certainly been the one thing that's been highlighted in all the electorates we've been door knocking in so far. Everybody, and I think COVID has actually focused attention on that. We're going to be advocating for returning services to regional South Australia. We're just seeing the continual eroding of that consolidation in larger hospitals, so people have further to travel. And you're going to the state election, that's one of the main areas we're going to be looking at in terms of ways that we can incentivise people to stay, but also ways that we can empower communities to be able to support their health services and to grow them back into the bush. So decentralisation and regional services is something the National Party is very strong on, but we've got to get the foundations right. We've got to look at housing, we've got to look at regional health, and make sure that when we're encouraging and inviting people to come back to the country, that when they get there, the full gamut of services are there to support them.
When you mentioned the country health, talking about that, the Labor Party policy, they just seem to be centred on this, what they call the City Basketball Stadium, or the entertainment venue that the Marshall Liberal government, about $662 million they want to commit to that. Labor says they'll commit $100 million of what they won't spend on that stadium on country health, but all they're giving us is that dollar figure. They're not being specific about what will be rolled out in country health. The National Party policy going to be directed at specific locations or improvements, or is it just going to be a dollar figure you'll spend on country health?
No, I think it's probably more going to be more of a structured idea around what sort of network, hub and spoke network we need in the country, so that we have those centre points, but we also have tertiary services that can feed into them, including ambulances and just the way that, as I said, we've seen that eroding of those services for years. We need to get back to the basics. And I think in some of these things, there's we do need to put dollar figures on things and obviously be prudent from a budget point of view. But when it comes to people's health, we also need to prioritise and say that this isn't acceptable, that we no longer have access to these services. It's not acceptable that you have to, in our instance, go 2 hours to have a baby. there needs to be those services closer to where people are located, that we can't keep taking these services out.
Absolutely. Now, just you mentioned things eroding. Just quickly wanted to talk about roads and the state of South Australia's roads in the regions. Have you got any policy announcements at this point in time about what the National Party would do on roads in regional SA?
No, certainly not a policy announcement at this point in time, but again, that's another one of the main issues that we're hearing, people's concerns, probably lack of coordination between some of the state and council governments in terms of how they're being managed. But again, that's something hopefully close to the election we've got something we can come back with the policy on.
Now, just lastly, we talk about these things about policy and what the Nationals would do if you had people elected, but ultimately it comes down to how you can deliver that. Let's be realistic, you're not likely to form government with only 3 or 4 candidates at this point in time, but Karlene Maywald was in some ways aligned with the Labor government under Mike Rann. How would you approach a coalition scenario if you got elected in Mackillop, for instance, and it was down to your vote who formed government?
Look, we would stick to our principles of being a centre-right based party and supporting that, but we also wouldn't shy away from the fact that in order to receive that support, there would be certain things that would have to change in terms of how regional South Australia is being dealt with. Karlene made her decision back when she did, and that was certainly something that, while it was probably in the best interests of her electorate at the time, was certainly not in the National Party's interests from a brand point of view. So, as I said, I'll be quite clear that we are on the centre-right of politics, Conservative Party, and that would be the government that we would seek to support. But that support be contingent on seeing outcomes for the electorates that we're trying to champion.
Well, Jonathan, thanks for being generous with your time today. Much appreciated. We will catch up with you further going into the new year as the March election approaches, and do let us know what other candidates will be announced across regional SA in the coming months.
Thank you very much for your time today, Ricky.